Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Megan Olson with the Investment Advisor Association, and I welcome you to our webinar, Changing the Narrative, the AMC's First Year. During the webinar, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. You may submit questions to the speakers at any time during the presentation by typing them through the chat feature. Only the speakers will see your questions. Questions will be addressed as time allows. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded April 18th, 2019. I would now like to turn the presentation over to our moderator, Karen Barr, IAA's President and CEO. Karen.
Thank you, Megan, and welcome everyone to our webinar. We really appreciate your participation and interest in this really important initiative. We are pleased to report today on the progress of the IAA's Active Managers Council. The council was organized by a number of our members to provide a platform for education about the value of active management and to counter the persistent negative press and skepticism that has developed in the marketplace. The negative and misleading headlines are rampant. One recent headline compared active management to a landline while comparing passive management to an iPhone, just as one example. This oversimplified and misleading active versus passive narrative is a disservice to investors, the markets, and the economy. We believe that both active and passive management and all the variations in between have important roles to play in investment management and the markets. And investors should be free to choose the approach that best suits their needs. The Council has several key goals and objectives: to foster education and thought leadership, curate and sponsor research on these issues, to provide accurate messaging and correct misconceptions about active management, to level the playing field from a policy perspective, and to lay the foundation and condition the environment so that each firm, with their wide range of investment strategies and clients, have a fair opportunity to provide their own marketing and messaging. As I noted, the Council was established by members. It is member-driven and member-funded. It is led by a steering committee of 8 firms that have made a substantial contribution to these efforts, with more than a dozen at-large members strongly supporting our efforts as well. These firms deserve a lot of credit for taking the lead on this important initiative for our industry. And it is now my pleasure to turn it over to the chair of the steering committee, Benji Baer, Managing Director and Head of Global Product Marketing for JP Morgan Asset Management. Benji?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to all the participants that have agreed to join this webinar today. Our goal in bringing everyone together is to really provide an important level of insight into the work that the Council has done over the past year, and then more importantly, share the direction forward. There's a wealth of work that's been done, and we want to make sure you are aware of it and are able to take advantage of it at every path that makes sense to you. We also really want to get more of the industry involved in this important campaign as we seek to reframe the dialogue. So we ask you over the course of the next half hour or so to think about how can you adopt this messaging into the work that you're doing with each of your firms, with your clients. And then also think about joining the Council, being an important member that can help lead the way forward and contribute your ideas more directly. So now I want to walk you through what we consider our core beliefs that as a group we aligned around. We think these are really critical to how we think about and talk about active and passive management as we all move forward. First and foremost, as Karen mentioned, this is not about active versus passive, but this is a dialogue that has evolved as the investment management industry has changed and continues to innovate. We must think about how both active and passive investment strategies can work in concert together and how they play important complementary roles. Also, active management must be called out for playing a critical role in the market, capital formation, and ultimately corporate governance, as those active players point out challenges and opportunities for the firms that we're investing in. We also think it's very important that investors have a full view of information and the right education to be free to choose the right investment approach that helps them meet their important long-term goals and needs. Ultimately, we're investing so that people can achieve safe and secure retirement, reach personal goals, help corporations move forward and manage their balance sheets. And last but certainly not least, we have focused on the role that policymakers and regulators should play, and to be sure that they are not favoring any investment approach over the other. Those are important, that's an important dynamic that also has factored into our strategy. We can move to the next slide. How has this come together? We have 3 task forces, each dedicated with an important purpose. And we have already seen their impact over the past year. We're going to spend some time over the coming few minutes or 30 minutes taking you through what our policy task force is involved in, what our research task force is involved in, and then finishing with our communications task force. So Chris Carsman leads our policy task force, David Lafferty leads our research task force, and Justin Mize from Buttonwood Communications is going to finish comments around all the work that is happening from a communications standpoint. We now would like to turn it over to Chris, who's going to take us through the policy work underway and some of the achievements that have already taken place. Chris?
Thank you very much, Benji. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Carsman, and I'd like to add my thanks to all of you for joining us today. The Policy Task Force of the Active Managers Council is comprised of representatives from 10 of our member firms. Our goal is to ensure a level playing field for active management on public policy issues. As Benji said, this is a critically important part of our work. The narrative that passive is cheaper and therefore better for investors, while active is expensive and underperforms, is not only influencing public perception and the choices that investors make, but is having a real effect on legislators and regulators around the world. We've seen this in developments both here and outside the US, where there have been instances of policymakers expressing a view favoring passive products. With the current focus of policymakers on retirement reform here in the US and fees and expenses in Europe, it's a very real issue that all active managers should be concerned about. As Benji said, our message is that it's important for investors to have the ability to choose among the investment strategies best suited to meet their objectives, and public policy shouldn't get in the way of allowing investors that choice. So what are we doing? The Policy Task Force is tracking policy developments all around the world that have implications for active management. We're then working to engage with policymakers wherever those arise. First and foremost, we're educating policymakers on our mission and message, and when the opportunity presents, we're advocating for investor choice, making the point that both active and passive have important roles to play for investors. When we engage, we are asking policymakers to remain neutral and refrain from expressing a view or putting their finger on the scale in favor of passive when passing legislation or designing regulation. I have the next slide, please. Let me talk about what we've been up to. Over the past year, our plan has had us pursuing engagement both here and outside of the US. We submitted 2 comment letters in connection with policy releases, one in January here in the US in connection with the Warner-Himes white paper on portable retirement accounts, and another last July in connection with the FCA's, that's the UK financial services regulator. They had a consultation on disclosure and fees that we commented on. In February, task force members spent 2 days on Capitol Hill. You can see a picture of some of our team here. We met with House and Senate committee and legislative staff members, educating them on our message and directly advocating for a level playing field in whatever retirement reform legislation moves forward. Those meetings were all positive, but also instructive on how important it is to get our message out. I should also note here the important work of our other two task forces, research and communications, in their roles to create powerful research material and collateral that we were able to bring to these meetings and leave behind with folks. And you see some of the headings from some of that material there on the page. That's been critical for our effort to have that content to bring with us to our meetings. Outside of the US, we've been reaching out to non-US industry groups to let them know what we're doing and seeking opportunities for collaboration and coordination. Over the past few months, we've had a number of productive conversations with both UK and EU industry groups, both representing funds and advisors. And just last month, members of our task force were invited by one of the groups to participate in a meeting in Luxembourg. So we're making some headway there. Next slide, please. Looking ahead, we continue to view education and advocacy as a necessary part of our effort as policymakers continue retirement reform initiatives, which have the potential to raise the issue around active and passive management. And we've seen that recently in the proposed Savings for the Futures Act. We need to be in this conversation to make sure that legislators don't inadvertently close the door on active management for retirement savers. Over the next few months, we plan to carry our message to US regulators as well in meetings with the SEC, the DOL, and Treasury. Outside of the US, where this issue continues to be in the forefront as regulators in both the UK and the EU focus attention on fees, we will continue to reach out to our industry counterparts and look for openings for engagement there. We believe that changing the message from active versus passive to active and passive is critical for our industry. And if we don't come together as an industry to change the narrative with policymakers, there is the real risk that policymakers will make the narrative a permanent feature of our landscape. And that would be not only a bad outcome for our businesses, but a huge disservice to the investing public, the markets, and the economy. If you're an active manager, I hope you'll consider joining us. Thanks very much, and now let me turn this over to Dave Lafferty to talk about what our research task force has been up to.
Thank you, Christine. This is Dave Lafferty. My full regular time job is as Chief Market Strategist of Natixis Investment Managers. But as Christine mentioned, I chair the research task force here at the Active Managers Council. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my partner in crime, Teresa Hamaker from Versancher Consulting, who really does much of the leadership and the heavy lifting on the activities around the research task force. We are also, I would say, ably supported by other members of the AMC as well as the research task force who have been invaluable in sort of steering some of our direction, as well as contributing ideas, investment articles and content, and helping with sort of editorial push through on several of the deliverables, which I'll talk about now. The first and maybe one of the most major achievements was the AMC Commission Literature Review, challenging the conventional wisdom of active management. We commissioned Professor Martin Kramers from the University of Notre Dame to produce this. Many of you may know Professor Kramers as a leading academic in the area of active management and has written several papers on things like active share and patient capital. I will not steal any of Justin's thunder, but the pickup that we've had in terms of the literature review that Professor Kramers wrote, I think, has been tremendous, and I'm sure Justin will talk a little bit more about that. If we move to the next slide, I'll talk about a few other things. I should say, Teresa, along with my help, really did a background study of the SPIVA and Morningstar Active Passive Barometer. Many of you in the industry may be familiar with these. SPIVA is the S&P Index versus Active Management Scorecard, and the Morningstar Active Passive Barometer. As you heard discussed earlier, part of our job is to adjust or modify this narrative, and these two pieces in particular drive a lot of the anti-active management seminar. Teresa has done a fabulous review of these two documents that come out periodically to help us understand what's driving that narrative, to highlight both the strengths, weaknesses, and we would argue some of the biases that are embedded in much of the data that is pushed out across the industry. Another theme that had come up continuously was the performance of active managers in bear markets or in downtrending markets. This was another theme led by many of the firms that are part of the AMC and the Research Council, and we undertook a fairly industrious effort to review both the literature as well as much of the data. We did not, it's fairly wide ranging and the results are strong but more muted in recent years. So this will serve, we didn't produce any formalized results, although we created some press talking points, and this will also serve as a jumping off point for future literature that we can document in other efforts. Another major deliverable of the research task force was a commissioned review on active investing in the efficiency of securities markets. This was done by Professor Russ Wermers from the University of Maryland. This really hit at many of the value to both the inner workings of the capital markets and the value to the economy overall of having active investing, active management, and the process of security selection and the value that it adds to those areas in terms of the capital markets and the economy overall. And that, I think, was also very well received, which Justin will probably talk about. If we move to the final slide for the research task force, I'll highlight a couple of upcoming projects we're working on. Teresa has produced an add-on to Professor Wermer's paper. This really hits at much of the dual mandate. While the Wermers review and paper was focused on the effects of both the economy and the capital markets, Teresa has extended that with a paper that we are in the process of finishing on that really gets at many of the policy aspects that providing greater market efficiency should provide to policymakers that the policy task force can then leverage in the future. I am working on a paper a bit more broad, still have a little ways to go, but I am attacking something in a much less academic and more editorial standpoint, a different narrative, attempting to, I think debunk would be, might be a little too strong, but address many of the typical arguments and critiques we get for against active management when we're out speaking to investors and advisors in the U.S. and elsewhere. And so that's a TBD, but it's much more of a narrative approach as to a pure academic approach. And then I'll finalize, finish by saying that all the activities that the research task force undergoes, these are not ideas or deliverables that are designed to just be produced and sit around. We actively try to leverage this both through external publications, as I've already highlighted, as web content, as blogs, as talking points for our members, and maybe most importantly, a PR outreach to get that message, the research that we're finding, and how that matters to investors more broadly. And with that, that's probably a great jumping off point to kick it off to Justin that will talk about that PR outreach specifically.
It is indeed. Thank you, David. And I'm Justin Mize, founder president of Buttonwood Communications Group. The Communications Task Force is a team that includes the council members, IA staff, and my team from Buttonwood. I got to say, we are pretty excited about what we've been able to accomplish in a relatively short time. As you know, David was just referring to, there's been a lot of content created by the task force, by the communications team, by IA staff, others, members, and so forth. That's been terrific. We've engaged with media. We've generated media coverage, and I think as you'll see in a few minutes here, we've been able to have a positive impact on the whole active-passive narrative. So we began developing and implementing an integrated strategy in last April. We spent considerable time collaborating with members to gather input on how best to articulate the point of view of the council. The messaging from that process served as the foundation for all communications we developed, from the portal to blogs to press materials and much more. We knew we needed to create a central source for information on active management where we could send reporters, advisors. It could be a resource for advisors, be a resource for other professionals, anybody interested in the topic of active management. And thus, the activemanagers.com portal was born. We knew we needed voices from the industry, so this prompted us to create a speakers bureau, which is a subgroup of council members who raised their hands and volunteered to speak for the council. As those pieces came together, we began media outreach, which actually kicked off late last summer when we began arranging interviews for Karen to engage with some of the reporters that not necessarily were critical of active, but just the reporters that have been writing on this topic. Some of them definitely were critical. That also served as really setting the table for the launch of activemanagers.com and the Kramer's piece in September. And then the other key piece, I think, of our program that we're moving into now in particular is a key channel of the conference speaking circuit, because we know there's a lot of discussion out there that maybe doesn't necessarily hit all the press. So that's another piece. If we go to the next slide. So just digging into some of the details of our plan, I'll just kind of flag a couple of things here. David talked a lot about the Kramer's Challenging the Conventional Wisdom piece and Russ Wermer's Active Management Market Efficiency. Both of those we've been able to use to drive really strong media coverage. I'll illustrate more on Kramer's in a minute. Wermer's in particular, though, just launched a couple weeks ago. Already we've gotten positive coverage on that from wealthmanagement.com, from Traders Magazine. We've been able to put Russ, he's going to be on Chuck Jaffe's Moneyline tomorrow, which is fun. And then he's also been invited to do a summary of his research for pensions and investments. So, and we think there's going to have both these pieces from a PR perspective will have a lot more legs. Upcoming, really probably next week, we're going to be launching what I've been calling an AMC Original, which builds on Russ's framework to promote additional insights about the relationship between active management and market efficiency. Another thing I wanted to call attention to that we've been working on, particularly since the start of this year, has been to be more proactive in responding to negative articles. So that's involved a couple different things. I mean, certainly we are writing and submitting letters to the editor when we see something that we don't agree with. We just did this in the last 3-4 weeks. We responded to a Bloomberg piece. We responded to a Wall Street Journal piece. Earlier in the year, I was going to say the quarter, but earlier in the year, we published op-eds with advisor perspectives, and I think many of you probably saw the one in Ignites. So that was great. If we can move on. Thanks. So a few words about the portal, activemanagers.com. We would encourage everyone to visit the portal and view the content. As we mentioned, this is designed to be a central clearinghouse for information on the value of active management. So we welcome everyone's input and feedback on it, but we also invite anyone who wants to submit content, we will take that, but especially if you want to participate in more of the creation of the content or some of the Speakers Bureau activities to join the council and participate in that way. Next slide, please. And just digging a little deeper into what we have in the portal. So David and I both kind of covered this growing library of content we have, academic papers, white papers from members and non-members, content that the council has created, positive news coverage that we're curating, and many other things. But we've also created a blog, and we've done more than a dozen blog articles on active management, and they run the kind of gamut from summarizing some of the academic studies that we've done or that we're seeing others do, maybe summarizing institutional surveys, aggregating some of the positive news coverage on active, just making sure that anything that supports our mission and our message gets highlighted, so that's there, and also it's in a place that's easily to be found. We've begun creating infographics to visually tell our story. We've also started another initiative, this video series that we're pretty excited about, where we are inviting Speakers Bureau members to do 3 to 5 minute video segments, and we'll support them in any way that helps. We might suggest topics, but we're very open to topics that our Speakers Bureau members want to discuss, and then we support it by, if needed, scripting the interviews, helping the shoots, editing the videos, and so forth. And then lastly, in development are some tools that will be in a members only section. So a range of marketing collateral on active management geared to different audiences, more messaging documents, some of the things that Chris referenced earlier to materials that were used on the Hill, used with different audiences. Those things will all be housed in a members only section on the portal. Next slide, please. Okay, so this actually gets to kind of the fun stuff for a PR guy. Since the beginning of the program, we've been tracking the discussion in the media around active and passive, primarily in top tier and key trades. So a few key points as we look at these bar charts. I think the first point is that this the so-called debate on active passive is going to persist. You can just see there's a steady stream of negative articles, but we're actually very pleased, of course, that we've had an impact. The real kickoff from a PR standpoint for us was late September with the launch of the Kramer's piece. And you can see September, and particularly a lot of coverage from that happened in October. You see a nice spike there. So we're very pleased with that. The scary red bars in January and February, I would just mention, remind everyone that a lot of that coverage was driven by the passing of John Bogle. So a little bit of an anomaly. Regardless, though, you can see that, you know, a couple of key trends here. First, like I said, this is going to persist. And secondly, that we are seeing more positive stories on active management, and certainly all the work of the AMC and the content that the AMC is producing and distributing and putting out in the media is having an impact. So we're pretty excited about that. If we go to the next slide. And so I'll close with some highlights of the media coverage. I think that the headlines here speak for themselves. I'd like to point out really the quality of the media here, because you see a nice mix of top tier as well as key trade publications. And we think we're really spreading this across all the media that's going to hit the audiences that we care about. So that's great. And then I'll just also point out the panel discussion, just another example of the kinds of events that the council has been creating that have also driven media coverage. So depicted here was the panel discussion on the advantage of active management and powerful portfolio, which was at our leadership conference last fall. So Martin Kramer's, he talked about his paper as it was launched. Dave was on there. And Scott Gonsolin, who was from Texas Teachers, and Lester from JP Morgan. And somewhat amusingly, perhaps for given the topic, Rolf Agather, who is Managing Director of Research from FTSE Russell. So we actually had a passive guy moderate the panel on active, which was kind of fun. Each of those panelists' presentations are available as videos through activemanagers.com as well. So with that, Benji, let me hand it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Justin. So clearly we have come a very long way in the past year. I cannot say enough around the benefit of coming together and putting an industry voice forward. And that's been very well received, as you can see in the media and other instances. This continues to be powered by lots of independent work at a firm by firm level. I know at JP Morgan, the council itself was a catalyst to us building our own internal working group and delivering our own independent content that, again, is aligned in support of this very important mission. What you see on this page, where I draw your attention to, is our website, www.activemanagers.com. There's a plethora of tools, resources, content. You heard about all of it today. I encourage you to go, take a look, take advantage of it, share that with people throughout your various companies. But what's important now is how we move forward. If you could advance to the next slide. This effort is, as we said in the beginning, all member driven, and we really encourage you to join our efforts. This message is only beginning. We've made great progress, but we have a lot to do, and we really need to keep the drumbeat out in the market. We encourage your member support and your member input. Tell us what else we should be doing. What should we be doing differently? What are we missing? We really welcome everyone's ideas and thoughts. And now that there's a foundation, maybe it's a little bit easier for people to kind of jump in and provide guidance and thoughts. We encourage you to do that. We have set up a dedicated email box. It's called feedback@activemanagers.com. Please, you know, after this call, certainly we'd love the feedback if you found this helpful. But also over the course of as you're working and topics come up, or you, I guess, confront challenges around this important issue, do feel free to ping us. Hopefully, people are starting to think about questions that they would like to ask the panel today. So what I'm going to do in a couple of seconds is turn it over to Karen Barr, who's going to tee up questions that we've received over the course of the last couple of weeks, and also open it up to any of you that may have typed in questions for us. Really, thank you for dedicating time this afternoon. And with that, I'll turn it over to Karen.
Thank you, Benji. And now, as Benji mentioned, we will open it up to questions. I will start with questions that we have already received in advance of the webinar, but I would welcome you to send your questions through the chat as we do that. I'm going to ask actually myself the first question. We have gotten a number of questions about how folks can join the effort, and a number of folks have asked, why have members separately funded it? So as I mentioned, the effort is member-driven and funded. The members involved recognized a need for the effort to include sponsoring research and hiring a communications strategy firm, as you saw Justin and Buttonwood. These efforts are outside the normal course of IAA activities and services, and therefore there was seen to be a need for separate funding for these specific activities. The amount contributed was based on the size of firm and level of activity. So if you would like to join the council, please contact us for more information. We do have another question as to whether non-members can join. At this point, we are limiting the council to members of the IAA. So at this point, non-members cannot join, but please give us a call if you would like to join the IAA. A surprise answer to that question. Benji, we've received a number of questions about the implications of the Active Managers Council with respect to passive. So are these efforts some kind of implicit critique of passive? And will we also be providing educational materials on passive equally to active and so forth?
Got it. Yeah, that's actually a very good point, and a topic that even has come up in our organization as our product set has grown to include active, passive, and all kind of flavors in between. So I don't think we will have a dedicated effort to building out education around passive per se, but certainly in the spirit of one of our core beliefs that there is a place for both active and passive in the marketplace and in clients' portfolios. We try and take as much of an agnostic view and understand where each play a role, looking at people's client types, how they like to buy, how they like to invest. And we continue to, hold forth that there is a place for all in the market and a place for all in clients' portfolios. And the benefit of choice is an important and strong one. So I hope that answers that question, Karen.
Yes, thank you, Benji. We have another question. This one is for Justin. Justin, why do you think the press, or at least the perception seems to be by the press that they're consistently attacking active and with these kind of provocative headlines and negative pieces? Where do you think that's coming from?
A great question again, Karen. Thank you. Yeah, when we talk about this, I want to make a couple of points. First, that it can feel like it's all slanted one way. Interestingly, we work with firms that do active and passive, and the folks that do passive feel like sometimes they're getting short shrift. So I think some of it comes from, what side of the industry you're focused on. But we know from working with the reporters directly that they really are a mixed bag of viewpoints. Certainly some of the reporters that we encounter, I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure many people on this call would know who they are. Some people are very critical of active management. And I think that's grown out of really the last 10, maybe 10 to 15 years of very successful marketing around passive, particularly ETFs, as ETFs has grown and assets have grown. And the dominant storyline there, of course, has been low cost investing is the most important thing, and cost is the the main factor that so much of the discussion is focused on. And I think there probably was a time from an educational perspective that was important to emphasize that, but certainly not at the cost, pardon the pun, but not at the cost of all the other benefits that active management has to offer. So I think it is very much a momentum kind of scenario in many cases. And I think it also underscores why it's so important that, you know, the Active Managers Council is doing what it's doing and engaging and having a voice. And just to reiterate, I think would be great to have even more voices out there talking about active management to bring some balance there.
Thanks, Justin. Dave, question is, what are the kinds of areas where you've identified that additional research could be helpful, and what kind of support or materials from members would be helpful to the effort?
Yeah, another good question. I mean, I think from our standpoint, a lot of what the Research Council has done has been very big picture, looking at the academic evidence, summarizing what's out there. And we have done some proprietary research, but I think there's a lot of space for us to do more data-driven proprietary research of our own. That can sometimes be limited by time and the fact that, you know, members of the council have full-time jobs. So, you know, keeping in the spirit of the call, certainly new members and their contributions certainly add to the resources, but also any help we can get from member firms. The types of things, as I was mentioning, anything that's more quantitative, research-driven. We spend a lot of time thinking about environments that may be better or worse for active management, or passive, or market factors that may drive the narrative that Justin's been talking about. I think those are some of the areas that we'd like to look more into, and we're obviously asking for anyone who can join the council and provide us any research that they may have done, not only to kind of help kickstart that, but maybe send us in the right direction as well. So I think we've been very big picture. It's such an enormous subject from a research standpoint, but I think there is some real quantitative drivers that would help us better explain what's going on when, say, active managers go through a period of underperformance, and then just as likely when they go through a following period of outperformance. I think we'd like to roll up our sleeves and get more into that. That's one of a number of areas where I think we'd like to do more work.
Thanks, Dave. Chris, actually, before I ask you this question, I do want to note one thing about the policy effort and the efforts on the Hill that highlight why it's so important that we are there. We are ensuring that they hear from a broad range of kinds of firms. One of the key meetings we had with one of the authors of a retirement bill told us that we were the only ones in there talking about this kind of issue, and that we were the only ones who had commented on the investment options and strategies portion of the legislation, as opposed to just the structure of further retirement savings for investors. So, you know, I think it's really important to highlight that we are the only ones in many cases there talking about these issues. So with that, I will ask you the question we got. Why do folks in Congress tend to gravitate toward passive on retirement legislation? And this is a two-part question. How can we level the playing field both in the U.S. and abroad?
Well, thank you, Karen, and thanks to you and the IAA for stepping up to lead on this and to coalesce the industry on this very important initiative. Look, I think Congress, really all policymakers, right? They're people too, and so they're subject to the same influences that we've been talking about. You know, they read the newspaper, they read the financial press, they hear from their constituents who are reading the same things. And so that narrative has really taken root. And so it's everywhere. And I think it's really based on the misperception that somehow passive investments are both safe and cheap, and therefore suitable for all retirement investors. And so I think this is really where education is such an important part of what we need to do here. It's not, we're not arguing a point as much as explaining the need for balance and why the research that we're sponsoring is so important to this effort, because it provides underlying data to support what we're saying about the need for balance. And so I think that's the only way to win this war, is to really educate people on the importance of considering both passive and active, and that all investors should have the ability to choose amongst the array that's available, and nothing should foreclose that. So I think that's what we're about. That's what we're going to need to keep doing, both here in the US as well as outside the US.
Thank you, Chris. I do not see any further questions coming through, so we will go to the next slide. There are a lot of ways for folks to stay involved with this effort. Obviously, you've heard about our website. If you add yourself to the subscription list there by clicking on the link, you will get notifications of new material and blogs and research that we post to the website. Please follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We are in the beginning stages of establishing our social media presence there, and looking to build on that. And as Benji mentioned, please provide us any feedback at activemanagers.com. We would appreciate your engagement on this issue. We would appreciate your amplification of the messaging so that we are speaking with one collective voice, both active and passive, is the messaging. And the other messages on that slide. Those are the key points that we would appreciate all of you taking up the cause, if you will, and amplifying the messaging in your own conversations with the press and policymakers, in addition to your work with us. I do want to close by thanking the members of the council and the members of the steering committee. They have done tremendous work in stepping up to take the lead on these issues. And as I noted, they deserve great credit and kudos, and we really appreciate their efforts. And thanks to all of you for your involvement and support. We look forward to hearing from you, and have a great afternoon. This concludes our webinar today.